Elijah Booker was 41 years old, and for 9 years he had been the quietest man in every room his wife brought him into. He drove a 2019 Silverado with a cracked dashboard trim he had never bothered to replace. He wore the same rotation of flannel shirts to neighborhood cookouts. He carried a canvas lunch bag to work on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and his wife's friends had a name for him: Steady Elijah, which they meant as a mild insult dressed as a compliment, and which Nicole had never once moved to correct. He was at the courthouse on a Thursday morning in March when his wife laughed. It was not a nervous laugh. It was not the laugh of a woman who had misspoken or been caught off guard. It was the laugh of a woman who believed she had already won, who had spent 11 months building an exit she was certain was airtight, who had just watched her attorney slide a financial disclosure across the table that listed Elijah Booker's known assets at $340,000, the equity in their Charlotte home, a 401k, and the Silverado, and who had just said to that attorney, loud enough for the mediator to hear, "That's it? I'm walking away from this man for that?" The mediator looked up from his notes. Elijah did not look up at all. His hands were folded on the table. His face was still. What Nicole did not know, what she had arranged her entire exit strategy around not knowing, was that the $340,000 figure her attorney had assembled from the documents Nicole herself had gathered was not incorrect. It was simply incomplete by approximately $149,660,000. What happened in that conference room over the next 40 minutes would cost Nicole Booker everything she thought she was laughing at. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The coffee was still hot. Elijah sat at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in late January with the mug held in both hands, looking through the sliding glass door at the backyard. The cedar raised beds he had built 2 autumns before were bare now, soil dark and resting, waiting for March. He had designed the joinery himself, mortise and tenon on the corners, no hardware, the kind of construction that would outlast the house it sat behind. His grandfather had taught him that. Solomon Booker, who had worked 41 years as a master carpenter in Richmond, Virginia, who had built church pews and school desks and the oak credenza that still sat in Elijah's home office, and who had told his grandson once in the workshop, hands guiding the boy's hands along the grain, "Wood doesn't lie, Eli. You cut against it, it splits. You work with it, it holds forever." Elijah had applied that principle to most things in his life. He was a civil and structural engineer by training, a partner at a mid-size infrastructure firm by title, and by practice, the kind of man who reads stress tolerances the way other men read box scores, naturally, reflexively, without effort. He had been doing it since he was 19 years old. He had met Nicole at a professional conference in Washington, D.C., 11 years prior. She was in hospitality management, sharp and social, the kind of woman who worked a room the way a musician worked an audience, present, attentive, making each person feel briefly singular. She had introduced herself to him at the hotel bar by asking a question about the conference panel he had just left, and the question was good enough that he had stayed to answer it. They had talked for 2 hours. He had driven back to Charlotte thinking about her specific way of listening, the way she leaned forward slightly when she found something interesting, the way she didn't perform curiosity but actually had it. That woman, the one at the hotel bar, had been real. He was certain of that. The woman she had since become was a different construction, and he had been watching the transition for longer than he had admitted to himself. She came downstairs now as he sat with his coffee, dressed for her day, kissed the side of his head without looking at him, checked her phone at the counter with her back partially turned. She asked if he had eaten. He said he would in a bit. She set her mug in the sink and left. The door to the garage closed. He noted the perfume. She had been wearing it for 6 weeks. He had not bought it, and she had not mentioned it. He returned to his coffee and his view of the cedar beds and stayed very still for a while. The text arrived 11 minutes later, not to his phone, to the iPad on the counter, which had been accidentally linked to her iCloud account 18 months prior, which she had forgotten about, which he had also never mentioned. The preview was 4 words before the screen locked. 4 words was enough. He did not go to the iPad immediately. He finished his coffee. He rinsed the mug. He stood at the kitchen counter for approximately 3 minutes and allowed his mind to do what trained minds do with unexpected structural data: absorb it, catalog it, and begin identifying load-bearing points. Then he walked to the counter and picked up the iPad. The message was from a contact saved as MW. He recognized the number's area code as Raleigh. The message, now visible in full on the screen he unlocked with her passcode, her mother's birthday, which she had told him 6 years ago and never changed, read, "Did you check the account? I need to know we're still on track." He stood there reading it twice. Then he set the iPad down precisely where it had been, angle and position unchanged. His face remained perfectly calm. He went to the home office and opened the filing cabinet where Nicole maintained the household documents. She was organized. He had always appreciated that about her. Folders labeled by category, chronological within each. He moved through them with the same method he used in site document reviews. He was looking for pattern, not incident. The household expense records went back 4 years. He pulled the last 18 months and carried them to his desk. What he found over the next 90 minutes was not chaotic. It was, if anything, impressively methodical. Small cash withdrawals from the joint checking, never more than $800 at a time, averaging twice per month. A recurring transfer to an account he did not recognize, labeled in her records only as savings, personal, totaling across 18 months, $38,400. 2 wire transfers to the same external account, each of $9,000 chosen. He understood immediately, because the federal reporting threshold for suspicious transaction flags was $10,000. Whoever had advised her on this had some financial literacy. He photographed everything, each page, each statement, each transfer record. He forwarded each image to his secure email and then deleted the sent copies from the device. He returned the files to the cabinet in their original order. He sat at the desk for a moment. His grandfather's credenza was against the wall to his left, solid and dark and unchanged. He opened a new folder on his desktop. He named it simply Nicole. Then he opened a second folder. He named that one Everything Else. He picked up his phone and called his attorney. Not the firm attorney, his personal attorney. The one who had handled the original trust restructuring 8 years ago and who was the only individual in Charlotte, outside of his accountant and 1 board member, who knew the complete picture. "Warren," he said when the call connected, "I need you to get me in front of a family law specialist. The best one you know." A pause. "How soon?" "Yesterday," Elijah said quietly. He set the phone down. Through the window of the home office, he could see the edge of the cedar beds, the bare soil, waiting. He thought about what his grandfather had told him once about load-bearing joints. That the joint you built correctly was invisible. No one saw it working. They only noticed when the wrong one failed. He had spent 9 years building invisible joints. He thought it was time to find out where hers were. Adrienne Voss had been practicing family law in Charlotte for 31 years and had seen, by her own approximate estimate, most of what a marriage could produce in its dissolution. She was 63, precise, with a kind of stillness that came not from patience, but from having already calculated 3 moves ahead in any given conversation. She reviewed Elijah's documentation folder, printed, tabbed, organized by date, without speaking for 6 full minutes. "The transfers to the external account," she said finally. "You have no access to that account. Not directly. But your financial advisor does." She looked up. "You structured the trust to retain oversight provisions on all joint and individual accounts held during the marriage. Did she know that?" "No." Adrienne set the folder down and looked at him steadily. "The oversight provision means your trust administrator has constructive access to transaction histories on any account she opened or operated during the marriage if those accounts received funds from marital assets." "Which these did." "Yes," she allowed herself a brief expression that was not quite a smile. "Then we have a complete picture. We just need to let her attorney assemble what they think is the picture. First, that's important." He understood. He had applied the same principle in infrastructure assessments. You let the other parties show you their model before you showed them yours. You found the gaps in their data. Then you showed them the actual load. "There's one more thing," Elijah said. He opened the second folder, everything else, and slid 3 pages across the desk. Adrienne read them. The first was a summary from Warren's contact, a licensed investigator, showing that M.W. was a man named Marcus Whitfield, 44, a commercial lender from Raleigh, who had been seen with Nicole at 3 different locations in the Research Triangle over the past 5 months, and who had been the co-signatory on a newly opened joint savings account in Nicole's and Whitfield's names at a credit union in Cary, North Carolina. The account currently held $47,800. The second page showed that Whitfield had a prior civil judgment against him from 2019, a fraud claim brought by a former business partner, settled under seal, with the settlement amount redacted, but the judgment amount listed at $210,000. The third page was a screenshot of a text exchange, recovered through lawful means Warren had not detailed, but had confirmed were admissible, in which Nicole and Whitfield discussed, in plain language, the asset-gathering timeline. Adrienne looked at the third page for a long time. She was planning to file using an incomplete asset disclosure, Adrienne said. She believed she knew what there was. "She knew what I let her see," Elijah said. Adrienne folded her hands. "Mr. Booker, I want to be direct with you. If we proceed the way I'm thinking, the outcome is going to be total. Are you prepared for that?" "I'm an engineer," he said. "I don't build halfway." 3 days passed. Adrienne's office filed for divorce first, preemptive, comprehensive, with a full and complete asset disclosure attached, running to 41 pages, which included the trust documentation, the portfolio summaries, the infrastructure consulting contracts, the equity positions, and the minority ownership stake in a logistics company that had been quietly acquired 4 years prior. 41 pages representing, in total, an estate valued at $150 million in documented and verified assets. Nicole's attorney received service on a Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, he had called Adrienne's office twice. Meanwhile, Elijah drove to his Uncle Gerald's house in Concord and sat on the porch and told him the whole thing from the beginning. Gerald was 70, a retired pipefitter who had known Elijah since he was 4 years old, and who had the quality of saying exactly one sentence when one sentence was all that was needed. When Elijah finished, Gerald looked out at the yard and said, "Boy built something real." She thought she was taking the window box. Didn't know it was the whole house. Elijah came home that evening, cooked dinner, set a plate at the table, and waited for Nicole to come downstairs. She did. They ate together. She was quiet in the way that people who have just received unexpected information are quiet. processing, recalculating, not yet ready to show the hand. He answered her 2 questions about his day. He cleared the dishes. He told her good night. He slept the full night through. The mediation was scheduled for a Thursday. Nicole's attorney had requested it, which Adrienne had anticipated. The conference room was on the 14th floor of a building in uptown Charlotte, glass on 2 sides, the city below in the clear March air. Elijah arrived first with Adrienne and Warren. Nicole arrived 8 minutes later with her attorney, a man named Caldwell, competent, now visibly recalibrated from the attorney who had presumably assured his client she was walking into a clean collection of modest assets. Nicole sat down across from Elijah. She looked composed. She had dressed carefully. Whatever she was feeling was not yet on her face, which he credited her for. He had always credited her composure. Her attorney opened by noting that the disclosed assets schedule had introduced complexity into the proceedings, and that his client had questions about the valuation methodology of certain trust assets. Standard language. A probe to find out how firmly Adrienne would hold the documentation. Adrienne let Caldwell finish. Then she nodded to Warren, who opened the leather portfolio and produced the first stack of documents. The trust had been established 8 years ago, before the marriage. Pre-marital asset. Adrienne's memo on the applicable North Carolina statute was clear and well-sourced, and Caldwell had to read it 3 times before he set it down. The equity positions, the infrastructure contracts, the logistics stake had all been acquired, held, and managed exclusively through the trust. Not commingled. Not dependent on marital contribution. Documented to the date. The joint estate, what Nicole was actually entitled to under equitable distribution, was the house, the 401k, and the shared checking account, which, after the $38,400 in traced withdrawals and the $18,000 in dual wire transfers were netted against her claim, left her with approximately $12,000 in documented marital equity and a house she could not afford to buy out. Caldwell looked at the net equity figure. He leaned toward Nicole and said something quiet. Nicole's composure cracked at the edges, not dramatically, just at the edges, the way a surface does before the deeper fracture. She looked at Elijah with an expression he could not entirely read and did not try to. "Elijah," she said. Her voice was even. "You have to understand that I didn't. The account in Cary," Adrienne said pleasantly, sliding one more page across the table. "The joint account in your name and Marcus Whitfield's name opened 7 months ago, containing $47,800, which we can demonstrate with bank transfer records, received funds from your personal savings account, which received funds from the marital checking account, which your husband funded exclusively." She paused. "We are not currently pursuing a fraud claim. That is a courtesy. It remains available to us." Caldwell closed his portfolio. Nicole looked at the page. Then she looked at Elijah. For the first time that morning, her eyes were wet. "Marcus told me," she started. "I know what Marcus told you," Elijah said. He kept his voice low. "He told you that you were leaving a man with $340,000 and a cracked dashboard. And he was right about the dashboard." He stood. He straightened his jacket, the dark gray one, the good one he kept for the rooms that required it. "You laughed in this building," he said. 3 weeks ago, in the room down the hall. I need you to know I heard it. Not because it hurt me. Because I want you to understand the distance between what you thought you knew and what was actually true. That distance is the whole story." He picked up his folder. "Adrienne will handle the rest." He did not look back at the table. He walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and rode down 14 floors to the lobby and out into the March air where the city was going about its business in the ordinary way of cities. He sat in the Silverado for a moment. The cracked dashboard trim was still there. He had never seen a reason to replace it. He drove home. 16 months moved through Charlotte like a long cooperative season. Elijah kept the house. The court's ruling on the trust assets had been, in Adrian's word, clean. The traced withdrawals were ordered returned. The carry account, identified in the proceedings as having received marital funds, was subject to a recovery order that Whitfield's attorney had initially contested, and then, after 2 hearings, stopped contesting. Whitfield had relocated from Raleigh to somewhere his former associates described vaguely as out of state. The civil fraud judgment on his record had attracted, in the months following the mediation, the attention of the North Carolina Banking Commission. His lending license was under review. These were facts that arrived through Adrian's final correspondence and through a brief phone call with Warren. Elijah registered them and moved on. Nicole was in Greensboro. He knew this the way you know facts that come to you without being sought, through a mutual acquaintance, through a LinkedIn notification he had not requested. She was in property management. Her mother, whom Elijah had always genuinely liked and who had sent him a handwritten note 6 weeks after the mediation that he had read once and placed in his grandfather's credenza, had apparently not spoken to Nicole since the proceedings. The social geometry of what Nicole had done had reorganized around her in ways that could not be repaired with an apology. Elijah planted the spring garden in April. Tomatoes, 2 kinds of pepper, a row of basil along the south edge of the cedar beds. He repaired the mortise joint on the far corner of the north bed that had showed minor movement over the winter. A wedge of the same cedar, fitted tightly, held with nothing but wood glue and pressure. His grandfather's method. He met Camille at a foundation board meeting in May. She ran educational programs for a nonprofit that his trust supported quietly, the way it supported most things. She was an architect, thoughtful and deliberate, with a way of looking at a space, any space, a room, a backyard, an idea, as though she was already seeing what it could become. On their 3rd evening together, she had stood at the edge of the cedar beds and asked him about the joinery, and he had told her about Solomon Booker. And she had listened the whole way through, without filling the silence unnecessarily. He respected that. She was there on a Saturday in July, when he finished the repair on the north bed, pressing the wedge home with a mallet, checking the corner with a square. She brought coffee out. They sat on the deck in the early heat and said very little, and the morning sat around them easy and unhurried. The Silverado was still in the driveway with the cracked dashboard trim. He had thought about replacing it. He kept deciding not to. There was a version of a man the world had assumed he was, modest, invisible, steadily ordinary, and he had lived inside that version without apology or concealment. It had not been performance. It had been preference. A man who had spent his life reading what things could bear had known, from early on, the precise weight of other people's assumptions, and had found it easier to let them carry that weight than to interrupt them. Some people saw a cracked dashboard and made a calculation. That calculation was their problem, not his. He had built everything worth keeping. He intended to keep building. Some things, he thought, watching the July light move across the garden, were worth the patience to do right. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.